You're listening to CropTalk, the podcast for agricultural leaders. The guests you hear on the show are experimenting with new ideas and tactics. They're in the lab, greenhouse, or field, getting their hands dirty and making agriculture prosper. You'll hear about their innovations, successes, and their challenges, but more importantly, how they overcame them. My name is Charlie McKenzie, and I'm your host. Let's talk crops. What's up, folks? Charlie McKenzie here, back with another episode of Leaders Talk Crops on CropTalk podcast. It's a beautiful day, and it's going to be an even better day because I'm having a fantastic conversation. Listen, I'm looking into the future already, folks. I already know it's going to be a fantastic conversation. I've had a few of those with this individual before, someone that I'm fond of and what he's doing. And so we're having this conversation to make sure that the topic, reasons why you should consider more than CBD potency when selecting your hemp cultivars for production in 2021. And the guest is none other than Jeremy Klettke, the founder, CEO, and head breeder at Davis Farms of Oregon. So I'm going to get right into this with a unique question and then into the topic. Jeremy, what's something that you're passionate about outside of hemp?
First, let me say, Charlie, thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast. I really appreciate what you're doing. And that's a hard question for me because I'm so hemp centric. You know, my life has been so focused on cannabis, but I guess, you know, the easy and all encompassing answer is that I really enjoy environmental sustainability. I'm very focused on and passionate about protecting the planet that does such a good job of sustaining and protecting us, and would really like to help it move away from the tipping point that we've pushed it towards.
I love that. I mean, you have like this canvas in terms of using, or not, maybe not canvas, I guess maybe this vehicle, if you will, with the cannabis plant and hemp to be able to do that, to really like execute on being sustainable. And so, you know, outside of what you're doing with the plant, it even kind of merges in. So that's really cool that it's something outside that's really valuable, but you can use hemp and the cannabis plant as a tool in that journey.
Certainly can. They really fall right parallel to each other. They're right in line with each other. Supporting one is supporting the other. After all, it is food, fuel, fiber, and medicine.
Boom. Oh man, I love that. So we're getting into the topic right away, and we'll learn a little bit more about you later. So if you folks are like, man, I got to hear more about this guy already, you know, fast forward a little bit, but don't skip this content. You're not going to want to miss it. Jeremy, we're talking about more than just CBD potency here. And, you know, you've been doing your thing for a while, and I'm really grateful for that. I've been in the industry having one heck of a time with a bunch of different farmers, growing myself, and everyone's focused on the CBD percentage and how much they're yielding and multiplying pounds by CBD percentage or trying to get to milligrams essentially of CBD. You know, there's more to it than that. And I think one of the questions that we should talk about in this to get started, especially with, you know, where hemp's at, is what role should total THC compliance play when making your genetic selection?
You know, I think as we move forward and the industry evolves, both from the consumer side and from a regulatory perspective, I think total THC, you know, and I'm glad you bring it up because that should become the farmer's focus for a few reasons. And, you know, I'd say first, as the market gains momentum and, you know, we're starting to see this happen globally, I think growing a product that can be moved anywhere in the US or even in any nation in the world is really what makes sense. You know, why bar yourself from potential markets? And when we're starting to see this push for a standardization, and I mean, let's just establish that it could be 0.6, it could be 1%,
right?
But that's what we're really looking for is a global standardization, because that's what fuels the industry. And, you know, as we see the USDA lean towards a 0.3 total T compliance, and we see the EU adopt the same sort of protocols, you know, it seems to me, why bar yourself from potential markets? So that's, you know, one reason to really focus on total THC. You know, I'd say also by using total as a criteria for selecting genetics, you can certainly take some of the fear out and guesswork out of the season.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're sitting here and you're planting a variety that your seed provider is telling you, just test early and test often and be prepared for early harvest, and now you'll be compliant. That doesn't sound like a very comfortable position for a farmer to be in. And so, that's a good reason to focus on Total T up front, is just knowing that as you get further along in your crop, you're not sitting there wondering when you're going to go hot. And as this market evolves into a smokable market, let's all really call out the elephant in the room. And that's that, you can't harvest this plant, prematurely and have the richness and compounds that you have, or the flavor that you have for a smokable. So, that right there is that puts Total THC right up front in at least with these new, testing protocols that we're under. And, I'd say, going back to kind of how you started that, at the very least, if we end up focusing on Total THC content when we're selecting genetics, it gives us a different focal point. And ideally, it moves us away, in my mind, from being lured into purchasing, solely by a promise of a 15 to 20% or whatever CBD content. And those, honestly, you and I both know those contents are often cherry picked from a single COA anyway. And so, we need to move away from that, because we need to be looking at, a lot of different things like agronomic traits and certainly, terpene content, a lot of things that we can go into. So ideally, that's the last thing about looking at Total T that benefits us, is it causes our eyes to kind of, shift a different direction. And maybe in doing that, the byproduct is we start to look at the plant a little bit more as a whole instead of just a single compound.
Oh man, so much to unpack in there. I love everything you're saying. I'm definitely jiving with it from a farmer's perspective. Like, hey, I'd much rather start the season feeling like I'm not playing guesswork games with my compliance. And, testing often and testing early is a great thing to do, especially if you have Total THC compliant genetics, because you can understand even more about the plant, right? I still think you should do that, but try to get something that you have confidence in, that you're not like skating on thin ice. Farmers have enough to worry about when it comes to growing and getting a crop out and it being valuable. Why not take that off your plate? So that's kind of my feeling with that. But then you said something I really love: standardization from a compliance standpoint, like being able to have one Total THC number and us being good with that, whatever that, ends up being, and then everyone getting on the same path and really rocking forward, because we're going to be stronger together if we have a common goal, whether we're all on our own little, island doing our own thing with our companies. If we all have this thing to shoot for, we can put our money where our mouth is in a lot of ways. And that's not the case when it's discombobulated.
I agree. And I'd say, if we're all looking optimistically down the road, I think that we get to a point here in a few years where this is a moot point, that we have a global legalization and that we're not so focused on this. But right now, with this nascent industry, anything that we can do to standardize, regulate, and help the whole thing to move forward collectively, I think is a benefit to the hemp plant as a whole.
High five on that. Yeah, there's at this point in time, it's critically important to focus on it based on what we know now. And, eventually, like you said, I think we'll be focused on other things that are going to be important at that time, but it'll still be related to the plant in maybe an even bigger way than it is now, which is exciting. But doing what we're doing now and having the conversation we're having now, it can affect a lot of people next year. And especially your quote unquote average hemp farmer now. I think what you're going to see in 2021, from my perspective, is you've kind of niched out a lot of people have either become a hemp farmer or aren't a hemp farmer. Some are dipping their toes into it a little bit if they've never done it before, but chances are you've been doing it for a little while and you're ready to weather the storm, or you have weathered the storm, or you're diversifying and you're a large commodity crop grower that has the resources, whatever it may be. You need to be making these decisions here in the next couple months. I mean, shoot, I'd be having this conversation right now with my team. Hey, what are we doing? What are we looking at for next year? How did things perform, last year? So I'm curious, you have a unique perspective because you are a production farmer. Like, you go out there and get after it, not just, breed, as I understand it. Is that correct, Jeremy?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So from your standpoint, what are the traits you consider and the boxes you're checking other than total THC compliance when you're making these genetic selections for, commercial cultivation on the scale that we're talking about here?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. And I'm actually happy that you used the term production farmer, because I think a lot of us aren't looking at this from a production standpoint. And certainly when we take a step back to the last bit of our conversation and talk about focusing on a CBD content, I'd start with looking at the things that I'm looking at when I make a genetic selection. One primary one is yield potential. I want to know what these plants do in field and what my yield potential per acre is. It's worth noting, as we move into a market that's, based more and more on smokable flower, that it's a product sold by weight, and yep. It's sold by flower or hard weight in particular. So if you're looking at a product that a guy can tell you, a breeder can tell you, that product, for a number of reasons, it breaks apical dominance or whatever, it's more suited to your region, that you can get double the yield. Well, that's a no-brainer. I mean, if you have an acre with double the yield potential, even if you have three quarters of the CBD content, you win, right? Even in a purely biomass to processor model, you win.
Yep.
And we're moving away from that. We're moving where this is a pound-to-pound deal. And as the market matures, people are waking up to terpenes and high efficacy products and entourage. So I'd say yield potential is one that, people really need to look at, because if you're selling smokable, double the yield is double the value. I guess another one I'd say is, looking at, I just mentioned looking at terpenes. Terpene content is a criteria. I think even if you're looking from a processing standpoint, the evolution of processing is moving away from single compound extraction. We realize that the efficacy is way low. So you're going to benefit by selecting a product that has a high terpene content, that has minors in it. That's going to be attractive to processors that are looking at broad spectrum or full spectrum products. So certainly, all of this really is about moving away from just looking at that single CBD compound, which it's the critical compound. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's the key compound that interacts with our endogenous cannabinoid system, but we need the entourage of compounds around it to really increase the efficacy. And consumers are realizing that. Like I said, they're starting to wake up, and so that's one of the selection criteria that I think a farmer should absolutely look at is minors and terpene content.
Jeremy, it's really interesting from a farmer standpoint. Like, it hasn't necessarily gotten to the point where processors are paying based on terpene content or minors yet, but it seems like as time goes on, there will be development in standards for either that company or potentially, I don't want to say globally, but maybe regionally, in terms of there's got to be some sort of objective standardization of, hey, with all of these constituents, it makes this quality of product, because it's not just a pound of this 1 milligram or this one cannabinoid and its set of milligrams, but it's like, man, you've got all these variables that tie into it. And then even from, a processor standpoint, you could be looking at like, how dry is the material? How has it been dried? Like, is it brown? Is there anything left in there? There's just so many variables that, like, I think farmers, if they're focused on more than CBD, they're going to be ahead of the game as processors are adapting like you're describing. So like you can meet them and have the product that is valuable for them on the market when harvest season comes, not just hemp. And I think there's a big difference between that going forward, in my opinion. I think you're going to have to bring something worthwhile to the market to get it taken off.
I think so as well, Charlie. I agree with you 100%. I'd say that, if that's just an evolution from a smokable standpoint and the consumer saying, look, I recognize that, these flavors or this set of compounds are what's attractive to me and what works well for my body, or even break that down and take it back to the single compound model where, we've got companies out there like Sigma Aldrich that have been extracting or, been purchasing extracted terpenes and selling them for research compounds for years. So this is already an established market, not just research compounds, but flavorings for food and drink, skincare, pharmaceuticals. So just the idea from a single compound perspective, I think we may, in a few years, fast forward here, get to a point where the terpene value outweighs, when fractioned off, outweighs the value of the cannabinoids. We don't know, but there's already existing markets for these places. It's not, for these compounds, it's not like we have to develop the markets. The cool thing about cannabis and hemp is that, now we have this plant at field scale that's this cornucopia of compounds. And this plant contains over 120 different potential mono and sesquiterpenes alone. So yeah, and at a field scale now we have acres of this. So the potential, to be able to extract terpenes just for different uses that we've already been applying them for. I'm going to give you a really good example. Every $2,000 skin cream that you see out there in the skincare anti-aging market, contains a terpene that is extracted from a German chamomile plant that, it's really hard to get in over Unity. But guess what? Cannabis creates the same terpene, and we'll take it further. Guess what? It turns out we can't synthesize this terpene, that we have to naturally extract it. Wow. So yeah, you start getting down the rabbit hole. And I just think we're looking at something for farmers that says, hey, stop looking at this thing from a single compound perspective. And really, when you're doing your genetic selection, recognize that you have a huge amount of potential outside of that single compound.
It seems like the plant just keeps giving, and you just gotta look a little deeper. Like you said, you could take the, if a processor, if you're someone growing and you're selling to a processor, and the processor has relationships with some of these companies that are, taking that off. Your product could be worth a lot more than you necessarily consider, or, it could be what you need to keep the farm going. And in a lot of cases, that's what farmers want, want to keep their lifestyle going and have a crop that they can hang their hat on and feel good about it. And so I love the way you're describing. It kind of is empowering the farmer to understand that they do have something extremely valuable. And especially from the smokable flower standpoint, there are very few smokable varieties that I've encountered that have been anywhere near the total THC compliance range, or just that mark, if you will, hitting that 0.3 total THC and having the desirable bud structure or terpene content that's going to lead to a really enjoyable smoke. And if you're comparing it to, traditional cannabis, recreational or medical, a lot of it doesn't stack up, especially if you're trying to hit that compliance. There are folks that aren't trying to hit that, and full term is decent, but when it comes down to that 0.3 total THC, it's really hard to find something that has the bag appeal and has those qualities like you just described that can drive a lot of value for the consumer.
You're dead on, Charlie. And I tell you, just from a breeding standpoint, that, I've been working with and testing CBD varieties before people really were even paying attention to CBD. So we were the primary producer of CBD to THC 1-to-1s, 2-to-1s, 10-to-1s, and 20-to-1s in the state of Oregon for the medical market since 2007. So having been in that space for a long time and see the value of the entourage and the terpenes, right? How they increase efficacy. The big problem with this breeding program of ours is as soon as you start to bring down the THC content below 0.4, 0.5, the terpenes want to walk away with it. You really have to struggle to find varieties that will actually hold terpenes and hold cure once you get down below that compliant threshold. And it's absolutely possible. It just has to be targeted and direct work. I mean, we went through over 40,000 versions of the varieties that we have to end up with six commercialized varieties for the marketplace that all have unique terpene expressions. So you're right. But I do want people to understand that it's just work. If we all put our heads down and work in this direction, we can have dozens of wonderful varieties for the market in no time at all. What ended up happening is people were working in a different direction. They were just working towards the highest CBD content they could get while remaining under a Delta 9.3, which is really easy to do. So just for everybody, hang in there. I think there's going to be dozens of Total T quality terpene rich varieties coming to the marketplace as people start to breathe in that direction.
I love that. Hey, I think from what I remember, we were talking about at one point, you had another really good reason you should look at more than CBD. And it had to do with, if you were using a seed lot to grow with and not, you're not buying clones. So you're buying seeds, looking at what the feminization rate really is. Like,
I'm glad you're pulling us back out of the weeds, Charlie. Thank you, because I go down that terpene pathway forever. And what we really need to do here is leave this podcast giving farmers the best tools that we can. So you're dead on. I think it's critical that these farmers are looking at third-party feminization reports. That those third-party feminization reports are comprehensive.
Okay.
We've seen a lot of them that are, showing 100% on a cross section of 30 seeds. That you can't do that. So in our case, we're running 1,272 independent sites per batch per variety to get our feminization results, and it's costly. So there's small producers, it's kind of cost prohibitive for them. But this is kind of a line in the sand for a farmer to be looking at who's a quality producer and who's not. But I think even more critically, what I'm seeing in the market, Charlie, are unstable genetics with hermaphroditic potential. So you can have a variety that, even if it shows the seed is 100% feminized, it hasn't been stabilized. They haven't done the 2 years worth of work of production cycles to remove the hermaphroditic potential. It's a unique plant in a number of ways. And one of those is that it's naturally resistant to us removing the male population. I mean, you can call it a survival instinct if you want, but it can take a couple of years to eliminate the potential for the plant to continue to produce black pollen or single male branches. So It's important not only that you look at your fem reports, but that you just ask your breeder directly. And this farmers, I mean, if you got a guy selling you seed and he doesn't, he can't get you in touch with the guy who bred the seed, that's a big red flag. So don't hesitate to ask them about their stability and their hermaphroditic potential. It's really important for seeding your crop, especially if you're going into looking at the smokable market where there's very low tolerance for seeds.
Oh yeah, I mean even so. Well, I'll stop. I had a lot of thoughts there. Right off the bat, like you said, very low tolerance. I mean, just in the past year, it was that I saw just a heavy focus on how many seeds per pound. Like folks are really dialed in on like, hey, if I'm finding 3 seeds in this pound of smokable, it is not AAA quality as they would call it or whatever they're deeming that. And so that's a huge point. But then like worst case scenario, you're going or best case scenario, you're growing for biomass and you do have some problems with hermaphrodites. That's still affecting your overall production capability. No doubt about it. You're losing some sort of potential, especially if you're not trying to do anything with, any seed in your crop.
That's correct.
So it's huge. And being able to get to the person that has been working with the plant and speak to that person, that is a huge, huge plus. And it sounds like from your perspective, which I respect a lot because of what you've done and where you've been, it should be standard.
I think for now, Charlie, and, in the nascent industry, as the industry develops, we're in our infancy and we're breeding, and putting out filial 1 or F1 first generation genetics. I think it's really important. I think in 10 years, we're going to have better standards and better certification and clear, traditional labeling that farmers are used to. But for the time being, we really have to, it falls back on the farmer in a lot of ways to protect themselves on the seed purchase. So
from what I understand, and I've had experience with, and I'll just tell you a unique story here. Willing to admit this. Got some varieties my first year helping folks out there in North Carolina and Virginia. And, I was pretty pumped up about what the COAs had to say and what the breeder was telling me that I was going to get out of it. And turns out the plants just, didn't perform well at our location for a number of reasons that I reconsidered when I'm standing out there going, why are my plants only 2 feet tall and their bud structure sucks and they're going to finish like this and they're diseased and there's a lot that I've lost already. And it came down to understanding how well those varieties performed in my location versus where I purchased them from. So I'm curious, as a grower, what should you try to gather and understand about your location and maybe even down to the microclimate on your farm so that you can understand, which variety checks those boxes?
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you. And I think it's happened to a lot of farmers. And you bring up another really good point. And that's, it's making sure that the plants that you're purchasing are suited to your, their agronomic traits are suited to your environment. We're working with a plant that has generally been coddled and babied indoors. So kind of what happened in the hemp breeding space is you have, all of these 20-to-1 varieties that were existing in elite clone form. And they're just anomalies that just didn't get weeded out of the mix when people were selecting before they were actually looking at analytics, right? So you have this beautiful plant and you're certainly selecting for THC. And when you're talking about a resin producing plant, but for whatever reason, it stayed around. And we have a few of them like the ACDC or the R4, so there are several of these examples. And so those varieties had been grown indoors and babied for years and years and years, basically moved away from, any need to protect themselves from any sort of fringe climate. And now we've, in some cases, bred those with a hemp plant. But in most cases, funny enough, we've really crossed them with another anomaly. So, that's how we're getting. So you take these plants that have just been babied indoors, basically, and now you're going to move them out into your environment and you're going to have problems. So the first thing I'd say is I'm really proud of our breeding that we do have 6 commercial varieties, but we have 6 not because we want you to grow all 6 in Virginia. We have 6 because there are some that are suited for Virginia and some that are suited for Arizona, right, and so on and so forth. So it's really about knowing your location and microclimate. But let me break it down in with 3 basic challenges that you're going to want that occur regarding hemp and climate, and you're going to want to look at. I'd say the first and the most troubling is generally mold or fungus. And I say is most troubling because the way that it generally comes on is right at the end of your season. Yeah. So your input's all there. You've spent all the time. You've loved watching your plants grow, and all of a sudden they're 90% water, and you've got this thick flower, and botrytis sets in or PM sets in, and so that's number one. Make sure that you have plants that are mold resistant. And if possible, there's not a lot of data out there, not a lot of historical data, but you would like to see university mold studies, if possible, to give you an idea of how resistant that variety can be. But, just at least asking, And the corn earworms and the armyworms are actually adding to mold problems right now. So that's another one to be considerate of. If you have, problems with corn earworms or armyworms, you really need a mold resistant plant. So, keeping in mind that humidity and mold generally become a problem as the plant gets closer to maturity. But there's another side of that too, and that's Pythia. If your feet are too wet all the time early in life, if you don't have a plant that's good mold resistant, right, so the feet, the roots, the base of the plant, you're going to cause Pythia, and you're going to have root rot problems right there. So keep focused on that mold factor. I think as we develop better varieties, you're going to see the breeders out there really putting that front and center in their advertising. Second, is high heat and low humidity. So if you're growing in the first is obviously a high humidity environment. The second, if you're in a high heat and low humidity environment. Okay. And where that impacts the plants is generally on the young plant side. So if you're in a high heat, low humidity environment, you're going to want to select plants that are extremely vigorous and hardy and in the younger parts of their lives, and heat tolerant and drought tolerant. If you're planting in a desert region, one thing to consider is a higher planting density for quicker shading of the soil, and select plants that have good light strike and good light penetration so they can grow close to each other, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to get around this, and it's good that you bring this up, Charlie, because every single region, every single growing zone is going to have a different approach. And many variables, like I say, not just planting density or plant selection, but on and on and on. The tip is with the sativa is that they're thin blade leaf varieties, so they can go higher density. They still will create a shading faster, which is what you need in those young plants, and help to reduce the soil temperature. And the same goes if you have really bad weed competition, right? Something that gets a canopy quick and shades the soil is going to help you with that.
Oh man, that's a huge labor saver too. I mean, from the standpoint of folks who are trying to go out there and either go out with the tractor and do some sort of cultivation, or later on when canopy is closing in and you can't really get in there with a piece of equipment, having to send folks in there trying to compete. I mean, that's a huge labor saver.
You're right. I've seen a lot of Narrows tractors picked up in the last few years to try and get down rows to try and cultivate out weeds. So yes, and there are so many ways to approach this. Planting density is a big one of them that we see, and it's a hard place for me to be in, Charlie, because here I am providing the seed, and I'm kind of right.
Oh man, I hadn't thought about that conundrum. Yeah, but okay, folks, let me put this out there. I am a firm believer in the biomass to stem ratio. And for certain varieties, I think that you can probably have a better yield per acre, and you will have a better margin if you're planting at a higher density. I don't know what that number is. And there's got to be there's got to be some sort of curve there where you're not benefiting anymore, but it's worth, in my opinion, trialing for every variety that you grow.
Thanks for saying that, Charlie. And it is a funny position for me to be in, but I truly believe in a lot of cases that $500 more an acre on seed can get you $2,000 to $3,000 more an acre at the back end. So it's really about yield per acre, right? Yep. Is what we're looking for. And I think the last thing that I'd really talk about is frost. That's the third and final critical element when you're looking at planting. And I do want you to know that these genetics can be pretty damn frost hardy if you choose the right genetics. Our genetics, the first year that we put them out in the field, we were pretty impressed that we had some in Montana standing up to 26 degrees for 8 hours sustained and 2 inches of snow on them.
Holy
and
smokes.
Since then, and since then we've learned that you can even go deeper than that at the right time of year and with the right tools, like turning your irrigation on, good farmers tools.
Yep.
But it is important for you to know your historical frost data and know when you've had your killing frost and what the lows have been, and present that to your breeder as well. Talk to them about the genetics and are they going to be able to stand up to that historical killing frost in our region.
Oh man, I want to really highlight something you just said that I don't think is done quite enough. And it just like a light bulb went off in my head when you said it. You should bring things to your breeder to prepare them to help make the best decision for you or in conjunction with you. It shouldn't be, hey, I'm looking for seeds. Don't know much. And you might not know much, but you should come as prepared as physically possible. If you can't find anything, well, so be it. You got to start somewhere. But if you can come prepared, having that sort of information just puts you on the track to success. And I think while customers would like to look at someone selling a product as, needing to do the work to get the sale, if you want to invest the kind of money that you're going to invest into your crop and get something out of it, it's worth taking the time to educate yourself on what needs to be brought to the table to make the best decisions possible. It's a two-way street.
Well said, Charlie. And it's a two-way street in many ways. It's a two-way street. When the farmer comes to me and expresses to me their concerns, then it helps me to, develop plants that address those concerns as we move forward. And it's a slow process. But right now, when the industry is so new, that's a critical part of this, and I think, like I say, go back to what we talked about earlier. Soon the farmer won't have to have that high touch. But ideally, where we are is we have a set of breeders in the hemp space that are willing to work with farmers and support farmers and understand that collectively we succeed. At Davis, I say one of our, mantras here is that a farmer's success is our success and a farmer's failure is our failure. Every seed that we put in the ground, we want to see grow and become a viable product at the end. So if we all engage in that relationship, I think early on, then we develop an industry that's sustainable and long lasting. But yeah, certainly farmers, hold your breeders accountable. At this point in the game, you should be able to speak to the person that bred the plant. And certainly, if you can't speak to the person that bred the plant, you should be able to speak to the people that produce the seed and make sure they're doing you a service, not producing from pest pathogen and virus filled, stock, doing a responsible job at the work that they're doing, but certainly producer and in best case scenario, breeder all the time, farmer to breeder.
That. So I got to thinking about what I just said there for a second, coming to the table with as much information as possible. Let's say that, okay, let's say that Charlie, I'm headed up to Virginia here in the next few months and I'm going to plant me a hemp crop in June. And I don't know anything at all about that region. And you know what? I need to get some learning. I need a resource. If you haven't grown somewhere before, haven't taken any good data on what you've done in the past, or haven't even grown a hemp crop, how can you get a good idea of what you're up against from like uncontrollable variable standpoint, things that, maybe you wouldn't, naturally think of or be in tune with?
Another good question. I guess I would say that, going back to this, what we were just talking about a minute ago here, the first thing you want to do is be able to get the info from the breeder.
Yep.
Yeah, and 30,000 foot view, Charlie, we're still looking at those three basic elements of your climate, So, you can get some data from the same climate zones, even if it's not exactly in your climate. And I'm not saying that it's not better to have something from your climate or microclimate anytime it's possible, but you should be able to get a general idea of your region from the breeder if they know their varieties at all. And in our case, I think this last year we crossed 38 states that we've, had successful crops in. So we have a pretty good idea. And I'm funny that I like to lean into the tough states. You bring up Virginia. We've done really well in Virginia. We've had some great trials with Dr. John Fike and at Virginia Tech, and great results from them, and great results with farmers in Virginia.
Yeah.
But your breeders should know. They should have a pretty good idea. Another resource that you can look to is growers associations. We're starting to get some great farm networks, regional farm networks, and I think those are going to become and are evolving into a good tool or resource for, new farmers to get an idea and of course there's always going to be force majeure. That's just a part of it. And the beautiful thing though about this, there's always going to be acts of God or bad things that happen in your environment and things that are out of your control. But from the other side of that, Charlie, is the nice thing is we're starting to get federal crop insurance and even more, we're getting, direct hemp insurance, not from USDA or Fed. There are some great private insurance companies out there. We're at the point now where we're looking to be able to have our seed underwritten for certain components so that we can provide that to a farmer saying, and the primary one, of course, Charlie, being if the crop goes hot, then they can, and in this case, I think the first ones are essentially providing them all of their input capital back. So you don't get the full value of the crop, but if your crop went hot because of seed, you're not going to lose your input capital. So I'd say from the other side, there are some great protections coming in, but really it all goes back to this, 20 minutes of this podcast, it seems like, which is make sure you're in touch with your breeder. And, we're here, like I'm absolutely here as a breeder and founder of this company. You can literally go onto our website and schedule a Calendly meeting with me. You can get into my calendar and get a 30-minute meeting with me. So that's how high touch we like to be. And I think as we're getting going over the next couple of years, it is something that these breeders should be, they should be held accountable for. And they should certainly consider it as part of their responsibility to be there and be accessible.
Wait a second. So I don't have to talk to like 6 people to get a hold of you, like through 6 different people and oh man, that's tough. Typically, I really like doing a lot more work to get a hold of the guy I'm telling you, it's, and I'm being sarcastic here, but you've been in the industry way longer than I have, but I've been in it long enough to have been on enough phone calls to have been very frustrated with the supply side of genetics, and working with good people is a very important thing. And so, just being able to get a hold of you, man, how huge is that? I mean, being able to have these conversations, someone that's willing to share this kind of information. Jeremy, I'm telling you, the knowledge that you've dropped since we've been on this podcast, it's any hemp farmer that's listening to this, whether it's smokable hemp flower or biomass related, they are benefiting from this conversation. And the fact that you're going to be able to link up with them directly via Calendly link, I mean, that's where the industry needs to continue to head. And I'm grateful for you operating like that with that radical transparency. And, I want to like roll this all back now into the reason you're doing all that seems to be because of your history with the plant and just who you are as a person. So I'm curious, share a little bit with me and the listeners about, your career up to this point, and then, what Davis Farms of Oregon means to you and what it does, day to day.
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. I'd be happy to. It's interesting that you're doing the format this way. I appreciate it too. That, now that people have understood a little bit about me, they get to see, or a little bit about what we do and who I am. They get to hear the background on that. But, I am a little unique in this way, that I have roughly 30 years in the cannabis and hemp space in a number of countries, and working with a number of different local, state, regional, and national governments to help roll these programs out. So I became passionate about the plant in the early 90s. I've grown up in Oregon, so the culture is here. You're around it. And it's a deep culture. It's not just about, an illicit product and making a living off an illicit product. People here understand and have understood the value of this plant. So I grew up here already understanding a little bit about what the plant did. And then what happened is I ended up having an opportunity to go work in Switzerland for the Swiss Medical Hemp Foundation, which was the Swiss government's operation in 1997 and 98. They had legalized all drugs and adopted a policy of regulation, taxation, and treatment. And so this gave me this opportunity to go over there. And funny enough, what are we doing? But we're producing the first 1-to-1 CBD THC ratio plants at field scale for 2 years. So after that happened to me, it just kind of everything up for me. Like it became, extremely, I became extremely passionate about it, and I became driven. I recognized the value of the plant. I had already seen the plant from the Emperor Wears No Clothes viewpoint.
Yep.
Where we talk about that food, fuel, fiber, and medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize from a food, fuel, and fiber standpoint, this is an incredible plant that it had developed and evolved parallel to us for so many millennia. But coming out of that, I think it set the tone for me. And so I'm that guy for years that I'd say, someday this might be legal, and they'd be like, yeah, sure. But here we are, right? And so, bottom line, I guess, that once you get that passion and that understanding, it's very hard to move back from that. And so I worked abroad until 2007. I worked in Switzerland for 2 years. And then, of course, global drug policy said, you can't do that. And they pushed back on Switzerland. So they kind of, pulled back that looseness. And I moved over to the Netherlands and worked in the Netherlands and had some great experience working outside of cannabis as well, but primarily in cannabis. So it helped to cement, in my mind, high-tech agriculture at scale, right? So I was, getting different viewpoints of the plant. From there, I ended up in Czech Republic, and then back here in 2007. And in 2007, we got engaged in the medical program here in Oregon, as I had mentioned earlier, and became the primary producer of CBD medicine here in Oregon. And we had 70,000 patients roughly in the state of Oregon, and a number of those patients, without the CBD in their lives, they just couldn't function. And I mean, we had these incredible stories of parents with kids with seizure disorder and autism and things like that. And so you start seeing this dramatic impact even further directly, story to story, people with tears in their eyes. And it's very hard to move back from it at that point. And of course, understanding these plants, it was natural for us in 2014 when the hemp started coming around. So quick backstory, 2015, we had a pilot program here in Oregon. There were a few people that were growing. 2014 and 2016, we passed the bill for CBD production. And I was a part of that policy making. And when we came out of the spring policymaking session and we had passed the bill for CBD production, we looked around, and the farmer that I was working with, who was the head of the Farm Bureau in the state at that time, he wanted to do 29 acres, and we couldn't find good genetics. So we went to my resources in Switzerland and found, some quality genetics to get us through the year. But that got me dialed in to recognizing that we needed to get some field hardy, high quality, stable genetics out in the field. And we were,
oh man, that is these are the best stories, Jeremy. I because you needed it. Like, you went out there and developed what you needed. It wasn't like I'm going out there because everyone needs this and I'm going to do. It's like you needed it, and then you could bring it to other people, which it seems like some of the best things develop that way.
I think so. And not having an understanding of what we were doing here, we had these 20-to-1 varieties that were great resin producers. And looking back on it, it was intelligent. But at the time, it was like, well, what do we do? We're so naive. And we ended up going out and collecting. So a group of gentlemen that I know from Colorado had been focusing on American ferals. And so they had actually done the legwork and gone around and collected 423 was the exact number, American feral seeds that ideally predate 1937. And that first year, we took all 423 of those seeds, and growing parallel to the Swiss stuff, we germinated them all indoors, ran leaf presence testing on them, and then put 96 out in the field. And these are straight American ferals. These are what you would call ditchweed.
Wow.
And so we found 96 that had the growth traits and chemical traits that we wanted to look at. And we put 5 acres of those. So we put 10,000 examples of those 96 plants in the field. And at the end of the season, what we came up with is 22 of those checked the boxes that we wanted to move forward. We had 5 males that had the growth traits that we needed, that we kept back as well. And we bred those 22 with the 5 males as an open pollination indoor breeding project to basically get the American feral baseline. coming out of that, we ended up with this incredible foundation line for field hardiness. And these are the lineage of plants that our founding fathers brought over to this country and have sustained themselves and managed to be, to live in the corners of fields for the last 100 years. And it reintroduced them into the breeding program. And so, like I say, it was almost coming from a point of like naivety. But looking back on it, it was an intelligent thing to do, and it worked out very well. And the result is we're providing farmers with genetics that we can stand behind. We're providing farmers with a tool that there's no question when they put it in the ground, they're going to have some success with it.
It must feel real good, not when you sell the seeds and you get the income from selling it, but when those farmers are calling after harvest. Right. Because having a business and bringing in income and people buying what you're making is great. But the customer satisfaction that you must get from folks, it must be so meaningful. Just like you were describing the satisfaction from, all those medical patients with the CBD products and tears. I mean, there are farmers who could either make or break their farm based on one of these crops. And if you're providing something that they can believe in and you stand behind, that is meaningful.
I have a humble pride about it, Charlie, because farmers are the backbone of our planet. They're the backbone of our civilization. And it's unfortunate, but what I've seen in this industry is I've seen farmers who are the biggest risk takers, and a lot of non-contract farmers who are the biggest risk takers and the biggest risk takers amongst the biggest risk takers, right? that these guys are getting duped through seed. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is that these farmers for sometimes generations have worked to gain that input capital that they need to plant that crop and see themselves through the season. And all they're trying to do is grow that crop and hope that they can get that input capital back, plus a little bit of cream to live on for the season, for the year, and then plant again next year. Yeah. And historically, like there's been very few situations like this where these seed predators, if you will, and forgive me for being that strong, but are coming in and robbing these farmers of their input capital in a way that they don't get to farm next year. And so, yes, I have a humble pride about the fact that we're working with farmers to give them a crop that ideally they can get some revenue out of, which you said it earlier. Farming is hard enough on its own. Now you have this offtake problem in an industry with, no real set supply chain. I mean, I just want to get them a crop, and get it out of the field and make that part of it simple, because the rest of it is complex enough. So again, it's like, 98, 99% germ rates, give them fast emergence, give them good growth traits so that they're not fighting an uphill battle from the first day they germinate the seed.
The type of person you are, I'm so excited to ask you this next question, hearing your journey and listening to that and all the people that you've collaborated with and worked with and having spent time with you and understanding you as a person, being very gracious and just like you described, having humble pride. I think this question is going to be fun. So who is someone or a group of people that you are currently grateful for in your life, for business, and why are you grateful for them?
Man, there are so many people I'm grateful for in this existence. There's no question about that. Come to mind right away. We did a program or a project for the Dalai Lama this last year.
Wow.
Where we created a variety, and this variety is on the cusp of Total T. So it was a good variety for Delta 9, but 100% of the proceeds went to His Holiness, and they went to his library, because this is a gentleman that has been, whatever your spiritual beliefs are, he's been coming back and reincarnating, in their belief system for a number of lifetimes. And now he's saying he's not going to come back. So what they're doing is they're building this library for him of all of his lifetime's works in Ithaca, New York, where his monastery is. And so the proceeds for that are all going towards His Holiness, because again, that's a person that, no matter what your spiritual beliefs are, this is a guy who's here to help make a positive impact on the world.
Yeah.
But there's a sidebar, and I have to say he's not like, I don't think he's the one that I would lean to. I would actually tell you that the person that's been extremely influential on me in the last few years is a gentleman named Dr. Dedi Meiri from Technion Institute in Israel.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've heard of him, but if you haven't heard of Dr. Dedi Meiri, he is somebody that you want to look into.
Okay.
Again, we have the 4 facets of the plant, and this is purely the medical side. I'm really focused on that right now. But I've been fortunate to know him, and he's a strong mentor to me out of Technion. And he was working under Dr. Raphael Meshulam, who is the gentleman who discovered THC. Okay, great. Well, Dedi is a gentleman who, as we start to really dissect the plant and look at single compound versus entourage science, he's done a bunch of white papers on entourage effect and entourage science. And I really believe in my heart that, you know, the plant is made perfect as a whole. And when we start to fractionate and move things out, we really undermine the strength of the plant. So he's been a real driver for that science. And the research that he's doing with his team in Israel, it's going to shape the way we view cannabis as medicine in the future. You know, he's already running, I think they done 96 indications where they're running different entourages of cannabinoids, flavonoids, and terpenoids on different human disease indications. And he's written some great stuff on that. And I'm probably ahead of the game to mention it, but I think they're about to come out with some really revolutionary stuff on leukemia.
Wow.
In cannabis. And I guess, you know, one of the neat things for me is that I'm super proud to say that he's opened the door to us, and that 4 of our Mariposa line of our 6 varieties that are commercialized are the first type 3 varieties that they're going to explore through their comprehensive analytics at Technion. So they're already over there, they're looking at them, and pretty soon we should have some really unique and comprehensive data that we haven't seen in the States on what those genetics contain. And then further, they're going to run them on the indications. And, you know, to me, this is a step in the right direction, because now if we can say to the farmer here, you plant Painted Lady, and Painted Lady has an offtake to this pharmaceutical company that's making this medicine from it, that Technion's already done the research and determined works on MS or whatever it is, you know, almost scary to make those claims. But, you know, then we have some connectivity in the marketplace. So without getting too far into the weeds, Charlie, Dedi Meiri has been this extremely bright icon for me, and he's opening up the doors. I mean, we're looking at 40 compounds here in the plant that we know contains as many as 600. He's finally given us the ability to look at, I think, 155 compounds.
Surrounding yourself with people like you're describing, I mean, it's what really pushes us forward as, you know, individuals, but also industries when you're making impact like he is and you are. It's amazing to think that a person in Israel, I appreciate that. I'll take some humble pride with that. But like you're out in Oregon, I'm hanging out here in Georgia currently. He's over there in Israel. All this collaboration's happening, and it's benefiting people all over the world. And it's with a plant that I don't know how many years ago people were just constantly being thrown in jail for.
Correct.
So it's amazing. And hey, you know, I'm grateful to learn of this individual and be able to dig in. It's like, I feel like every time I do a podcast, especially with folks like yourself, I've got like this list next to me of like 17 things I need to go check out afterwards. And it's like, man, I don't know. I just, there's so much that I don't know. And I discover through folks like yourself and then talking with you about things that, you know, I've been thinking about and just bouncing those ideas off of each other. I mean, it's really rewarding for me as an individual, but I think valuable for, you know, the people I work with as well. So my gratitude goes to y'all. And you know, I think that there's no doubt in my mind after hearing this podcast, listeners are going to be interested in talking to you, Jeremy, and you described a Calendly link, and I'm wondering, where can they find that Calendly link, or what is another way that they can get a hold of you when they want to?
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm pretty accessible, and I think that's part of the deal here. I think as we're building an industry that we need to make ourselves accessible to each other, both farmer and breeder. But as far as getting that Calendly link goes, you can get it at www.davishempfarms.com. So it's DAVISHEMPFARMS.com. And on there, you'll also find some great resources. There's a ton of educational content, including a webinar series for farmers, information about the genetics we offer, as well as some info on our company culture and history, which I think is important. Know that these people have a heart when you're dealing with them. I think that's historically part of this farming culture and farming community. We're people of heart. And there's a link right on the website. You schedule a 15 or 30-minute call with me directly on the website. It just lets you populate, and then it sends me a prompt. Hey, guess what? You have a meeting on X day with so-and-so. You can also check out our profiles. Social media isn't super friendly to hemp, but we do have some longstanding profiles on Instagram, Davis Hemp Farms, just like the website at Davis Hemp Farms. And then, if you're interested in, deeper the medicinal side of things and what we did with the Oregon medical market, we have Davis Herb Farms as well, Davis HERBFARMS. You can drop me a DM there. I'm the person that checks both of those social media platforms frequently. So reach out to us and we'll be happy to get you started and answer any questions, teach you anything we can about our seed.
If you're growing hemp this year in 2021 and you're listening to this podcast and you don't reach out to Jeremy, that's my answer. That's all I got. That's all I got to say. I'm not going to predict the future, but I think it's worth it. And that, folks, that's not even like I'm not being compensated whatsoever for any of that. It's literally the amount of radical transparency that you're offering and the history behind what it is that you've done. I mean, I had someone the other day ask me and say, I just don't understand. I come from traditional agriculture and I've been working, in soybean breeding, and I've been working in sugar beet breeding and all these different crops. And when I go to ask them about a seed lot, they can just give me all sorts of information, and I can just get really into like the history and the provenance. And he was like, you ask someone about the smokable hemp flower and they're like, yeah, a dude named Jimmy gave it to me. And that's all you're going to get sometimes. And it's like, there's got to be a better way. And so I look at it like this is an option, one, to learn about these varieties, but I mean, shoot, just to have a conversation about hemp and cannabis with you, Jeremy, I think, folks will benefit from it. And down the road, if it makes sense to get some of the varieties, then I'm looking forward to seeing how they perform.
Well, and I want to be clear. I appreciate you saying that, Charlie. And I want to be clear that I welcome those calls. This is an industry that I want to operate in. And if we don't create a sustainable model for that industry, well, then I don't have a job. So, if you're buying other people's seeds, that's okay. If you have questions for me about the industry in general, that's okay. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'll draw a hard line in the sand on that. But for now, let's get this thing moving, right?
Hey, I like the way you're looking at it. It's if you're here for the long haul, you're willing to put in some work and get the delayed gratification out of it. And right now, with how thirsty the folks are that are out there purchasing, thirsty for knowledge, as these folks are, I mean, you're doing a huge thing for them. So high five on that, Jeremy. And, I know where to find you, and I'm glad I do, because we'll be having a lot more conversations here soon. And, hopefully I'll be getting to see some of those, getting to those varieties, getting to flower there in Virginia, this coming year.
Wonderful. Open door policy for you always. You call me anytime. You're always welcome at our facilities. Definitely enjoy talking with you and appreciate what you are doing for the community as well. Do not make light of that.
Oh, that means a lot, Jeremy. And I will say, you've you're threatening me with a real good time. So I might have to take you up on that and get my ass out there. There's no doubt about it. And you better believe there are two people there are more than this. Okay. They're more than this, but there are two people specifically that I think I would be visiting if I was making an Oregon trip. And that would definitely be you, Wesley Ray, and then I'd probably go see my buddy Bill Cook and Kevin Nix over at Canawise, see how they're doing. But man, well, how crazy would it be if I had the opportunity to make that trip? I'm getting kind of excited about this now, Jeremy.
Make it happen. Let's make it happen. We can do it safely, even in this current environment we're living in. So yeah, you're always welcome, man.
High five. I'm looking forward to that, Jeremy. Folks, until next time, start clean, stay clean.
Thanks for listening, folks. This is Charlie McKenzie, and that was Crop Talk. Until next time, start clean, stay clean.